Okay, thanks for coming tonight, guys. Always appreciate when you give up your time to come and listen to one of these, because it is hard after a long day at work. The sheer numbers here would probably be a testament to the topic and the speaker tonight. So, Kev, I've worked with for a fair few years now and rate very highly, particularly on this topic, so I think we're really, really lucky to have him. He is an elite runner in his own right through middle distance, and he's one of the Athletics Australia physios, having just come back from Colombia at the World Youth Championships. Kev?
Correct.
So he's going to hopefully enlighten us on this topic, and I'm sure it'll be interactive towards the end, so it'll be good. We'll get a lot out of it. Thanks, Kev.
Thanks, Wally. All right, so again, thank you for coming out. Hopefully you guys get heaps out of this. That's the whole plan and idea. So if there's questions you want to know or things you want to know, just don't be afraid to ask. I think as much of a discussion as we can make within this hour and a half or hour, hopefully at best, the better, because I think it's more exciting when there's more than one person talking rather than me talking to everyone here. Okay, so appreciate that. Probably the aim of this, I want you guys to get an understanding of the general basic running mechanics, get an idea that it's probably not as complicated as you might think it could be, okay, and get an appreciation of the muscles that are involved, the joints that you use and the range they go through, and then ways that you can manipulate aspects of your running to get a better outcome, okay. So that's probably the whole aim of it, and hopefully it's not too complicated. First thing is what is running, and there's a little quote here that I read in one of the famous running articles, and he's quoted that the demarcation between walking and running occurs when periods of double support during the stance phase of the gait cycle, when both feet are simultaneously in contact with the ground, give way to two periods of double float at the beginning and end of the swing phase. So therefore, no foot is touching the ground. It seems obvious, but I think the thing to note there is the position of the body when you are running. We can see there's significant differences between someone that's walking and someone that's running. They get into much greater degrees of hip flexion. When they're landing probably a little bit closer to the centre of mass, and they do have that flight phase because we have to elevate our body up into the air and then over and land. And the way I think about it is, if I've got point A here and point B there, well, when we walk, we transfer our body forwards in that manner, okay? So our centre of mass often lags behind where we end up hitting the ground. But when we're running, our aim is to elevate our whole body up and over. So I'm getting from point A to point B like that. Okay, so it's a very different process than walking. So when you're running, your mechanics should involve that. You know, you'll often see out there runners that do tend to reach too far forwards, okay, and replicate that walking mechanics and landing too far in front. But we need to get our centre of mass forwards, okay. So that's why I put in that slide there. So it seems obvious, but it's very useful. Okay. A lot of the running articles will talk about ground reaction forces, so it's I have to talk about it very briefly. Basically, when I'm talking about ground reaction forces, easy ways to measure them are just your vertical ground reaction force and your horizontal. That being, when I run and hit the ground, how much force am I putting into the ground that it then pushes up at me? Okay, so it's a measure of, against body weight, of how much force you're putting into the ground. Going forwards and backwards, when you're horizontal, it's how much force you're putting in either forwards or backwards into the ground. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that into more detail, but I just thought I'd bring that up so everyone's up to speed on what I mean by ground reaction forces and talk about. Okay. Now, the first half of the presentation is going to really break down what a normal running stride or action looks like, okay, and what forces and things we're expected to see. Then we'll get later into how you can apply this into injury management. First thing we're going to talk about the differences between jogging and sprinting. Okay, when I jog, we tend to increase pace initially up to around, people will say about the 7 metres per second mark, but it doesn't matter, we can ignore those figures. As we increase pace, we initially tend to do that by increasing our stride length, and our stride length is the distance from that point A to point B when I made those marks. Okay, that's my stride length. So when you watch someone run, and we can probably all stand up now actually, we'll stand up. We'll do this a bit, I'll get you guys up and down a bit here. If you just jump up and down for me. Actually no, we'll run up and down, run up and down. Slowly. Okay, so as you do this, slowly increase your pace. Slowly increase your pace. Okay, and now as you've sort of done that, as you've increased your pace, you might have actually noticed that you might have elevated yourself off the ground a little bit more. Okay, slow back down again. Okay, and you're not coming up as high off the ground, so your stride length's got to change through your pace. So as you ran quicker, as you increased your pace, you actually came off the ground more, so therefore your stride length will invariably get bigger. Okay, now staying upright, keep increasing your pace, so, okay, and then as you keep increasing, keep going, you have to pick up your leg speed by the end, keep going real fast, sprint. So then what happens when you sprint is that, towards the end when we got really fast, then there was a big change in our leg turnover, okay? So to sprint, you have to increase your cadence. So initially there's an increase in your stride length, and then when you get faster, you start to increase your cadence or how quickly your legs turn over, okay? And you might have even noticed with that you actually got less air time. So when we were jogging, our air time was greater, but as you also sprint, your air time gets smaller as you get to those end stages of sprinting. Okay, and we'll talk about the reasons behind it. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's a big difference there. So that's what these graphs are saying. These graphs are saying, I know it's pretty unclear, I'll try and read it out to you, but when we go from about 2 metres a second to about 3.5 metres a second, there's a 63% maybe, or there's a fairly high increase in your step length change, okay? But there's not a large change in your cadence, and as you come up into higher degrees of sprinting, there's a greater change in cadence and a much smaller change in your step length, okay? So I'm just getting you to think about the little bits of biomechanics, and this will all make sense later when we're starting to apply this to management. All right, contact times. There was a graph that I couldn't get up because I couldn't get off the slide, but we all saw that. When you go from slow running to fast running, as you just did there, when we're running slowly, my feet are on the ground for a long period of time. As we run quicker, we have shorter and shorter contact times. Okay, and we'll go through the significance of that again in a second. Another common trait is that you'll often see people go from landing on their back of their foot as they're running slowly into, when you're sprinting, running on your forefoot. Okay. Now, the reason for that is because if my foot is on the ground for a lot longer, well then I'm going to run slower, because my whole time of running includes the time I'm in the air and the time I'm on the ground. And if those two numbers add up to a greater number, well then I'm going to be slower. But if the time I'm on the ground is shorter and the time I'm in the air is also relatively short, well then I'm effectively going to be a bit quicker in some sense. So your contact times have to come down. Okay? And we'll go through a bit more, but a large determinant of how quick you can run is how much force you can put into that ground in that instant of a second. So the better runners out there can often put more force than the rest of us into the ground in that instant of a second. So that's the big difference between us, and that's when you want to think about training running and you want to think about high performance running, sprinting and strengthening. That's really what you want to train, is how much force you can get into the ground in those instances of setting the shortest contact time. Now I've got a video here, and hopefully this all works for me, of some sprinters running. I think it's really interesting to see the mechanics that they go. This is I think works on my computer, so I don't know why it's not working on the PowerPoint. Let's see if we can fix that up. How come I can see that? Okay, so I'll put this in large. So this is just some sprinters. So the one thing I should say, everything I'm talking about at the moment is not about acceleration, it's about steady state running. Okay, acceleration is very different. Oh, this is going to be a joke, isn't it? What's going to back up? Sorry? I think I had it up here anyway. You might have loaded. Okay. Are we up? Why does it work here? Sorry guys, it wants to go through, but we might wait till it loads and we'll have another go. Because I think it is valuable and worthwhile seeing this. If we can't, no big loss. Any questions on so far we've talked about? Does anyone know YouTube, or do I just have to wait for this to degrade to hit the end and upload? It should be. So I might play it at the end then, okay, and we'll look at it all at the end. We were here. All right, we'll get to some more stuff here, okay, biomechanics. Now, so these are, this is from 1998, so running mechanics don't change too much, so you can go to any study an article and it's going to be relatively same through the ages. I think the point to note is that I suppose in running, as you run faster, so the dotted black line is as you get faster, that you're going to see a little bit more hip flexion in that swing phase. Okay. I think the other thing to note is that you'll land in a little bit of hip flexion. Don't worry about the exact degrees, but just understanding and land a little bit of hip flexion. We're going to land also with a little bit of knee flexion when we land, so we're not completely dead straight. And we're also going to land with a fairly neutral foot. So we're not landing in a foot that's plantar flexed down, and we're not landing hopefully in a foot that's too dorsiflexed either. Okay? So it's a fairly neutral foot is where you want to end up with that one. Okay, so they're probably the main points of that I wanted to bring up. Now, I've got a little video here, another one that hopefully works this time. Okay, and this is some of the things that we've been talking about. So I just wanted you to think about the different things that you'll see at running at different speeds. So when you're running slow, as we first talked about, that your contact time's longer. When you're running faster, your contact time's shorter. When you run faster, you have to swing the legs through the air a little bit faster, so your cadence gets quicker as well. Okay. We see a little bit more hip flexion. We see a little bit more knee flexion through that swing phase. Okay, does that all make sense? So getting just a bit of an idea of what we should see when you run. Okay, and this is what we sort of want to see in your patients. And the reason I go through some of this is because if you're getting someone to run for you and you watch them run and they run slowly, you want to see a difference when they run quick. You want to see them pick up their stride length, you want to see them pick up their cadence, you want to see them have greater degrees of range of motion through their hips. Okay, so if you're not seeing that, there's an issue there already. You've already picked up on. All right. This is one of the more important slides here, okay? And this is what's important to us as physios. This is the muscles that are active when you're running and when they're active, okay? So a fairly confusing set of graphs, but I'll talk you through it. So what we have here is the different speeds. So this is slow, this is a bit faster, faster and fast, sprinting really here, 9 metres a second. So that's the change in muscle activity as we get faster. This is at the hips, this is at the knees, and this is at the ankles. Okay. So if we go through it and we look at what's happening at the hips, as we're running slowly, there's not a lot of muscle activity at the hips. They more kick in as we get a little bit quicker, you know, the activity that's happening around the hips. And it happens, so this is when we're starting to leave the ground here. Okay, that's when your foot's leaving the ground. That's contact, and that's when you leave the ground. So the first big peak in your hip is at the end of that stance phase. And that green line here is your iliopsoas, so your hip flexors. So we know that your hip flexors work maximally at the end of that stance phase. And it happens greater at a greater period, at greater speeds. And the reason being is as you swing your leg through quicker, it has to work harder to bring your leg back through quickly. It has to do it quick. It can't just be lazy and bring it through slowly. It has to work hard to bring it through quickly. It's going to be a little bit of an eccentric workload to it, and then that positive workload to it. So that all makes sense. If we look even further along, at the end of the swing phase, there's a big peak here to the hamstrings. So again, well, that's when the hamstrings tend to fire up the most when we're running, and that is at that end part of that swing phase as it's trying to slow down that hip and bring it back this way. So I've got that's hamstrings there, that blue one. The other one just underneath it is that purple one, and you can actually see your glute max fires a little in purple, and then there's a little bit of an extra peak in that glute max at the end. So the glute max also picks up a lot when we're sprinting. Okay. So then we'll talk about the relevance to that in hamstring injuries in a second, but I think you guys can already piece it together that with hamstring injuries in sprinting, you can understand why it's going to happen in sprinting and not just when you're jogging around. We go to the knee. Well, the knee, there's a little bit of quads. The green one here is your vastus, and that tends to fire up when you hit the ground. So when we're running, we land, we hit the ground, that fires up. But there's relatively little change to it as we increase the speed. It doesn't really seem to change. Okay, so you can think about that in terms of people who might have quad injuries or have any pain around that area. You know, what does that mean? But they're not going to pick up their loads at all. What they got from jogging is what they're going to get probably when they sprint hard as well. All right. The other big one around the knee, again, we can see is your rec fem, which is the black. And again, that picks up at the end of that swing phase, works through the swing phase through there. So again, speed tends to pick up your hip flex a little bit more. Okay, so you think about that when your footy players who've got rec fem injuries. Now, what does it mean when we get them to run faster? When is it appropriate to? And the other big peak here again, big peak is your hamstrings again. So again, we know that it has a big workload around the hip and the knee, but it's a two-joint muscle at the same time at the end of swing phase, more so when you're running faster. Okay. Now, just to get an idea of this, let's all stand up again so we're not getting too bored. I want you guys just to swing your leg really slowly like this, as if you're running, slowly up and down. Okay? And now do it quick. Okay? And there's a simple explanation. You can see that you're working the muscles around your hip that little bit more. Okay? You can see that you're working the muscles around your knee just to stop that leg flying forwards a little bit more. So it's a fairly obvious thing. And this is where running's obvious. It's easy. It's what I want you guys to understand that. When you break it down, it is actually fairly obvious what you're going to see, what you can expect. All right, take a seat again. I'll get you standing again as well. So. The next one around the ankle. Now, this blue line here is your soleus down here, and as you can see, it probably does more work than anything in the rest of the body when you're running, is your soleus. So, I know Andrew always says that in footy, he only sees soleus injuries, he doesn't even see any gastroc injuries. And that's probably a fair explanation into it. Your soleus works a hell of a lot more than your gastroc's going to work in running. The gastroc tends to work right at the end of that stance phase, just to get that final little push off. But your soleus is working pretty early to control that shock absorption and then to accelerate your run forwards. And this is a little graph showing you exactly the workloads there. So this is soleus, is the blue one here, and you can see it rising up as you get faster. And we can see gastroc, which is the green line, coming up at the end. And then we can see the workload of the vasti, which is the red muscle, which comes on at the starter stance. Okay? And this grey line is every other muscle that we've got. So soleus works more than anything else. And gastroc and soleus combined work probably about 50 to 60% of your vertical forces. So they work more than half of everything when you're running. That's how important they are, and that's the case through all speeds of running. So if you've got a calf injury, as I'm currently carrying at the moment, it bloody does limit you. You can't do a hell of a lot of running because you're going to have to use it to a fair degree at any stage of running. The other thing we can see, as we talked about before, well, the calf doesn't do a whole lot more work between about 7 metres a second and 9 metres a second. Okay? The reason being is that it doesn't have the potential to work that hard anymore because we're hitting the ground so much quicker. So it can't physically work so much more. And that it's around that pace that we really pick up our leg turnover, our cadence, to compensate for the fact that the calf can't work anymore to get us faster because our contact times have to decrease so much that we have to pick up our leg turnover. Okay, does that make sense? So what I want you to do to think about this as well in contact times, stand up again, and I want you to do some big jumps up and down and see which muscles you use. So like this. Kill yourself. So you can see that you're using your hips, your knees, etc. But to do that, we need long contact times. To do that, you're going to run very slow. So that would mean I'd have to run like that sort of thing. Okay, I'd be very slow. Okay, now you've got to do quick contact times. Again, think about what muscle you have to do quick contact times. Go for it. So really quick jump. Right. So again, it's the calf. So it's obvious. It's really easy to think about what we're using. So when you're running, you're using your calves a lot, the most. Okay, and it's to do those quick contact times. Good one. This is another graph about calf. But that blue line is gastroc and soleus combined, so you can see pretty much. And the grey line's everything. The grey line is all the muscles. That's your ground reaction force, your total vertical ground reaction force. So your blue line here is gastroc and soleus combined. The yellow line is your quadriceps, it's your vasti. Okay, so barely working. Go first.
So if the calves are staying similar between the second last and the highest end speed, and the vasti, if anything, looks like it's dropping off.
Yeah.
What's providing that extra propulsion to get to the?
Well, you're not propelling yourself anymore in the air, so you're just turning your legs over quicker.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the change. Yeah. So it's more about getting the legs over the ground a little bit quicker or through the air quicker. That provides the change in speed. Yeah. Now, the bottom graph here is your anterior and posterior forces. So underneath means it's something that's braking us and slowing us down, and up above means it's propelling us forwards. So underneath is our yellow line here is our quads, and you can see they work more as a braking force when we run. Our gastroc and soleus, and you can see that grey line is sort of what they put as the total forces, pretty much do 100% of your forward propulsion. That all comes from your gastroc and soleus. So you can then think about, I suppose, in your training and rehab for any sort of calf injury, that we want to actually make sure we've got some forward propulsion in it. Okay, because if you're not training that, you're missing a big facet of what the calves do. And if you can't propel forward, you can't run, because it's all reliant on your calves. Okay, so that's how important your calves are to running. So have to be respected and looked after. Good one. Now, we've sort of slightly talked about this a little bit in terms of your glute max and hamstring work through that swing phase. So we know that at the end of as we pick up our speeds and we almost reach terminal speed, that we have to pick up our cadence, our leg swing has to increase quite significantly. And what that does is that really amplifies how much the glute max has to work at the end of that swing phase, and it maximises as well how much the hamstrings work. So the faster you move your legs through the air, the greater the workload in glute max and hamstrings. So then you think that towards your hamstring injuries. Well, hamstring injuries are going to happen around that top speed, you're going to say. We know the hamstrings are under maximum load at the end of swing phase, and a great article is Anthony Shack's article, 2011 or 12, can't remember, but he actually goes through the forces through each individual hamstring. We know at the end of that swing phase that they're under the most strain, so they're under the most length change, and they're under the most force. So that's more than likely you can assume in running when your hamstrings are going to go. So that's the age-old argument. Does the hamstrings go here, or does it go when we hit the ground? Well, more than likely, from all the studies that we can see in the data, it's going to happen when you're swinging through the air. So then you can think that towards when you're actually trying to treat your hamstrings and manage your hamstrings, it potentially is going to go here. And now, take note that this is sprinting. Football's different. You can probably get it, kicking a football. You probably get it as you're running and leaning down and picking up a ball. So there's other loads in football. This is sprinting. So I think you have to take note of that as well. So I'm not talking only or every sport. Okay. But we can also see as well for your hip flexors, they increase their workload, but not as significantly as those ones. The other point I bring up is that in training your hamstrings, well, if you want to get someone returning to play, it's no good going, okay, great, they can run at 70% of their pace, 80% or 90% of their pace, they're ready to go. Because there's a huge difference between 90% and 100%, even 95 and 100%. So you need to make sure your players can sprint at 100%. And in terms of training, I think there'll probably be an article coming out soon from the guys in Queensland showing that the biceps fem actually increases its workload with high-speed running, and it can actually be a nice way of therefore training your strength and endurance of your biceps fems to get them out there doing lots of repetitive high-speed running. Okay. Obviously, you're not going to do it in a day one hamstring, but you can do it during pre-season or end-stage rehab. Good one. Any questions regarding that? Cool. What did I want to talk about with this one? I think this is sort of showing you, this bottom graph here is where I want you to focus on, in that our ground contact time decreases as we run. Our aerial time, which is this one, so our time in the air goes up, goes up, goes up, and then as we sort of said, goes down because we have to get the legs through the air quicker. Okay, because the legs are spinning through the air quicker, we don't actually have that much more time in the air, we actually lose the time in the air before it. And that's because the calves, again, can't put enough force into the ground quick enough to get ourselves up. Okay, and therefore we can still see that your limit to running quickly is often going to be how strong your calves are and how put that force through the ground. All right. Now, you might say, what happens if I just get myself to increase how fast I can spin, get my legs turning over? So screw my calves, I'm just going to practice getting my legs going through the air much quicker. Well, they've done studies on this, and slow runners and fast runners have a maximal, or everyone has about the same speed we can actually get our legs through the air. So it seems to be like a human limit to how quickly we can get our legs through the air. So we can't actually train that anymore. And this is slow runners, and up here is some Olympic runners. Okay, and it's pretty much exactly the same. So we all seem to have this human limit to it, this genetic limit to it, and that, at the end of the day, that in your calves is going to limit, why you might not ever see someone running at 9 seconds at 100 metres unless they've got this ridiculously great ability to put a lot of power through the ground quickly. So that's why you're probably going to see a limit to it at some stage. So you can't get the legs going through the air quicker, basically that. The other thing I note from this though, I just want to see the next slide, is if slow lady can only put through, can only swing her legs that as quick as the fast guys here, but she's running slower, is she going to have the same amount of force through her hips as the fast person? Now I think that's the real interesting question. Okay, so at top speed, will the slower runner have the same amount of force as the faster runner through their hips? We don't know that yet. But I think it's an interesting question. And I'd almost say probably yes, because the workload of the muscles came about to purely how fast their legs are moving through the air, not in regards to how quick they actually travelled across the ground, because we've seen that as you travelled quickly across the ground, initially it didn't make any change to really the hip muscles, only when they hit top speed. So we know that top speed, and so your leg movement, how quickly you move across the ground, and your amount of power force you work through the hips is very closely correlated. So I think that's fairly interesting.
Doesn't that then come down to lever arms though?
Yeah, there'd be lever arms in it.
Versus...
You're right, lever arms are in there as well. But effective force. All right. I can't remember why that one's up, so I'm going to move on, because I don't think it's going to matter for us now. Now, this is another graph talking about everything that we've really talked about. Down the bottom here. So this is a person's swing time up here on this graph. So the amount of that's as they leave the ground and then hit the ground. That's the time that takes. So it's irrespective of contact time. And we've got the slow runners are these dots. The average pace runners are the hollow squares, and the fast runners are the darker squares. And again, we can see that they do hit that level of leg turnover at the same, they hit it at the same time. Okay. So again, as I sort of said, well, this runner here potentially might have as similar forces through the hips as that runner up there might have similar forces through the hips at that same line. It's just that these guys get it faster. So something I posed to our tube group a couple of months ago is, if we get the calves stronger at that same speed, do we reduce forces through the hips? And off that you'd say yes. So if your calves are stronger and you can increase your stride length at that relative pace, your cadence has to drop. If your cadence drops, then the amount of work done by your hips decreases. So in terms of injury prevention, is there a point there? Can we reduce some of the forces through the hips or the hamstrings in particular when running? Okay, but Note it, it's not at top speed, can't be at top speed because you're already at maximum workload. It's at a sub-maximal speed. Okay, but again, I think you can think about your calves and getting them strong into reducing workloads in the hips and in the knees. Okay. Alrighty. Lastly, we haven't got it yet about the importance of the calves. Here we go. Last thing here. These are your vertical forces again. Soleus is the first one. Next one's gastrocs. Next one's your vasti and rec fem. So in terms of vertical forces, all soleus. In terms of horizontal forces, well, we've got the quads here, so we said they work a bit more to brake. Your rec fem works to brake. Your tib ant works to brake. Glute max works to brake. And then down the bottom we've got a little bit of hamstrings here to propel us forwards. This is all stance phase, by the way. We've got gastroc here and soleus there. So soleus and gastroc do most of your forwards propulsion, pretty much everything, and soleus does a hell of a lot of your vertical. And your gastroc on top of that, they pretty much do everything as well. Okay. Good one. So it came to a conclusion, this all came to a conclusion by Tim Dawn in one of his papers that his number one strategy for running quicker is to use your calves a little bit more, okay, is to put more force into the ground through your calves. That's your number one strategy to get quicker. Your second strategy, once you've run out of that, is to get your legs turning over quicker. Okay, so they're your two strategies in running. That's where you can sort of break it down. And that's what you want to see when you get someone running slow to quick. You want to see those two strategies. And I'll come into some more things about that later. All right. And this is pretty much a summary of it. So when you see a change in when we increase speed, you should see a change in your biomechanics. So you should see an initial increase in stride length, in summary. You'd see an increase in their cadence towards the end of that pace, and a progression towards a 4-foot running action so they can get those quicker contact times. The soleus and gastroc contribute about 50 to 60% of your net vertical force and nearly all of the propulsive force going forward. So they pretty much do everything in running in terms of the ground contact. When you're training soleus and gastroc, I think we need to think of, as well as the vertical direction, the horizontal direction in your training. Okay, so when you're doing your rehab, just have a bit of a think about that. The amount of force we apply to the ground limits our running speed. So if you can't apply much force to the ground, your calves aren't functioning well, or you can't run quick. That's basically it. And you do see it in older runners, and that they lose that ability to push off and hit the ground quickly, and they run slower because of it. Okay, and that's the big thing that makes us all run slower as we get older, is we just can't get as much force or power through the ground. So for the older runners, and myself included here, probably because I'm getting my little calf injury, is that if we want to maintain our speed going forward, we have to do extra work through your calves. Okay, just so you minimise that loss that we will see with aging. The hip flexors and hip extensors are responsible for moving our legs through the air quicker. As speed increases, the work done by the hamstrings and glute max increases exponentially. And the hamstring muscles are under the greatest force and strain towards the end-terminal swing phase. So think about that when you're planning your hamstring rehab with running. As I said, this is running specific, not football or any other sport. So consider the ranges that you want to be in when you're strengthening. Okay, think about the length of the muscles and the angles they're in. You can use running as a form of strengthening the hamstring, but it has to be top speed running. And as I sort of posed you there, it's a question that's not been answered, and I asked Anthony Shack about that a couple of months ago, and he didn't have an answer for me either. So I rate him really high in terms of biomechanics and running. So if he doesn't have an answer, I don't think anyone has an answer for me there. But will calf strength reduce the work done at the hip at a given speed by reducing cadence? Well, potentially. But we don't know for sure. But I think there's a fair chance of it. Okay. So that's the heavy bit. Okay, that's probably new to a lot of people, but as I said, all you need to do now is jump up and down, run on the spot hard, and you can actually sort of break down and to think what muscles am I using, when do they switch in, and it all tends to make sense. So it shouldn't actually be too complex. And now you should be able to apply that to every runner when you look outside and watch the Olympic or World Champs are running, not this week but the week after in athletics, so tune into that. But when you watch those guys run, you'll be able to think about everything we've talked about. Those slower runners, are they hitting the ground a bit longer? You know, do they not have that great stride length? What are their biomechanics telling to you? Okay, we'll see it out there.
Kev, so you go the other way. Do you, if they've got posterior compartment syndrome, do you increase their cadence? Try and offload carbs, increase hit.
You could do, yes. That could be a strategy you could use to reduce the relative. You're right.
I ask also, Kevin, are there individual at the elite level outliers who sort of are different to this, or is everyone sort of pretty much follow this pattern?
I think everyone follows this pattern because some of these samples that they've got are people from all spectrums, Olympic runners and normal runners, and they all seem to have exactly the same pattern of going through increasing their stride length and then cadence and reaching that same terminal swing speed. So it seems to be in every runner. Yeah, and these are the determinants of what make the good runners and the bad runners, they found. Okay. All right. Footwear. So I'm now going to talk about footwear and cadence because this is something that's researched a lot out there, and there's plenty of studies talking about it, and there's been great debates over the past many years, and it's a common question that will get asked. So what's your name again? Sam. Sam has a pair of these Vibrams. We just had a chat about them before. So he'll get around running in these. If you don't know what they are, they're sort of almost like a sock with this really rubber sole on the bottom. Okay, so that's for more of your barefoot runners. Then we go along, you have your Nike Freeze, which is sort of your bit more mobile, minimal shoes. More of your racing flats, so a little bit lower of a heel pitch, but a lighter weight shoe still. Your more cushioned shoe, and then your more controlled shoe. So we all have different shoes and we all run in different shoes, and the big question is, what is the right shoe to be running in? So let's break it down, let's think about it. The question sort of really built ahead after that Born to Run book. I don't know if anyone's read that Born to Run book. A few of you. Very interesting book, and if you haven't read it, give it a read because it's quite fascinating what the author goes through and what he writes about. But around that time as well, there was this article by Lieberman which talked about ground reaction forces, okay, and vertical ground reaction forces, and they looked at people running in barefoot, and they looked at people running in shoes, and they looked at people from Africa who ran barefoot, and they looked at people from Africa who ran in shoes, and people from the USA who ran barefoot, and USA who ran in shoes. So they looked at a few different groups of people just to see what their ground reaction forces were, what their kinetics were, etc. And they found that in people that rear foot strike, so there's a rear foot strike and that's a rear foot strike, is that they have this real sharp impact peak when they hit the ground. Okay, and that's been associated with a few injury types, which we'll go through later. But it's been definitely towards your shin splints or your stress fractures, your femurs and tibias, patellofemoral joint pain. So it's been linked to those sorts of things. So they've gone, well, hang on, when I'm wearing a shoe, people tend to rear foot strike. That's what they sort of found. Okay, so the people from America that wore shoes and the people from Africa that wore shoes, they had a bit more of a tendency to hit the back of their heel, okay? And that associates with an increased peak. Whereas the people that were barefoot runners in Africa and America tended a little bit more to hit their forefoot. And the forefoot peak, you can see, is a little bit slower, okay? And it comes still about the same height, but it's just a little bit slower in the way it comes up. Now, it's about 3 times, the impact peak's about 3 times the level. interesting thing is, if you're a barefoot runner and you hit the ground on your heel, which God hopes you don't ever do, the impact peak's about 7 times as much as hitting your toes. Okay, so the thing to note from this, the quick little one, is if you're going to be a barefoot runner, make sure you hit the ground on the ball of your foot. Otherwise, you're going to do a hell of a lot of damage. So that's one thing they did get. The other thing they found is that if you're a rear foot runner and you land in a shoe, well, the impact peak in time is pretty much similar to running barefoot on your toes. So, is there a big difference? Well, probably a little. Look, I think it came up to be a little bit better being barefoot on your toes than being barefoot in a shoe. Is what it said. Okay. Now, what else can I tell you about this? Let me just grab my articles here. So, there's been a big meta-analysis and systematic review just recently done. So I thought I'd just get all the results from this. Now, although there's a hell of a lot of articles talking about this stuff, most of them are pretty crappy, okay, and don't have great quality. So we have to respect that in this instance. So most of these findings are of, he goes, there's very limited evidence, because the evidence quality wasn't so great. But what he said is the effects of barefoot running on loading rate appear dependent on strike pattern adopted, with a forefoot strike pattern found to reduce loading rate, while a rear foot strike pattern increases loading rate when running barefoot compared to shoe. Okay, so the key thing was there is that the major determinant of your ground reaction force is whether you're actually landing on your forefoot or on your rear foot. Not whether you're in a shoe or not, but whether you're landing forefoot or rear foot. So if you landed forefoot in a shoe, it's just as good as landing, that's as good as landing forefoot barefoot, so it didn't really make a big difference. If you're landing rear foot in a shoe, or you're a hell of a lot better off landing rear foot in a shoe than barefoot. So the big thing is that it's probably more dependent on how you're hitting the ground than what shoe you're in. Okay? Not everyone who adopts a barefoot shoe alters to a forefoot strike pattern. So in this same study, they took the people in shoes and then took them out of their shoes and got them to run. I think 84% of the guys in America that wore shoes stayed landing on their heels, on their back, their heels. So that's a problem. So and you asked before, you said you're very cautious about giving your patients barefoot running for that reason. Because if we're to do so, and they go out there and start having the same mechanics and running on their heels, well then they're going to come back a little quicker, much quicker. Might be good for business, but then they'll tell their mates that they've got them injured. So not a good idea. So again, it's probably more about getting people to hit the ground in a different manner by teaching them, rather than taking away or adding some stimulus in a shoe and hoping that that makes the change, the desired change. All right. What else can I tell you about it? And that's probably the main points there that I want you to take out of it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about cadence, and Lewis, you mentioned sort of cadence before as well in terms of changing the forces. Well, that's where cadence comes into it. So cadence again is how quickly we turn our legs over, and a lot of it tended to do with your braking force and your propulsive force. So when I'm running forwards, if I hit the ground and land in front of my centre of mass, it's going to slam on the brakes and slow me down, okay? Because I can't run forwards with my legs in front of me, I'll fall backwards. The only way I can run forwards is where my legs end up behind my centre of mass, so I can push myself forwards. So anything behind me is going to propel me, anything in front of me is going to slow me down. Now for stability, you probably have to land a little bit in front of you anyway, just a tap, okay, just for stability balance. Because if I'm going to land here, every time I'm going to fall flat on my face. So there's always going to be a little bit of that braking force involved. But what they were trying to do in increasing your cadence was minimise some of those horizontal forces, was their thought process behind a lot of it. In that a lot of people will run and overstrike here or overstride and land here in this position. So if they get them turning their legs over quicker, well, they found that they had to shorten their step length, and in doing so, change their forces. So that's sort of depicted in this graph here, or this picture, I should say. So the centre of mass distance from the heel. So they're looking at how far the foot landed in front of their centre of mass, and when they reduced their cadence by 10%, so they got to run 10% slower than their turnover at the same speed, they tended to hit the ground a little bit more in front of themselves. And when they increased their cadence faster than what they're comfortable at doing, they tended to land and hit the ground a little bit closer to the centre of mass. Okay, so that seems to help, that's great. The other thing is they looked at is how much your vertical excursion you had when you went running. So we want it to be efficient. You don't want to go up and down too much. It's a waste of energy. You kind of want to go like this. So they found that when they ran quicker, at a quicker cadence, their excursion was much less. So a little bit more efficient, as you could say in that sense. And they also changed the angle of their foot. So when you went slower, you landed a little bit more in that dorsiflexed rear foot positioning, and then when you ran a bit quicker, you started to come and land a little bit more into that neutral position down there. Okay, so they're the changes they found with it. And with that, it made big changes to the forces you put around the hip and knees and ankles. So if we're looking here, this is the energy absorbed and energy generated at the knee. Now, ankle, knee and hip. When they ran quicker, the energy absorbed at the knee was tiny. The hip was tiny. Okay? So when we run quicker, we can actually reduce the force through our hip. So that's got extra value for any of your patients with any sort of hip issues or hip pain, and they want to keep running. Well, maybe a simple thing is getting them to turn over their legs a little bit quicker. That's what this is sort of telling us. Okay. The other thing is that the workload, energy absorbed at the ankle, so in your calves, tended to be about the same. So there wasn't really a great change in your energy absorbed. But the energy generated in the ankle did decrease as we pick up the forces. Okay, and that's because you don't have as much time on the ground, as we've learned. Shorter contact time, the less time you have to push off, so it can result in less work on. Then also, what do we got here? The workload done at the knee also decreases as you increase the cadence. And as you slow down, it increases the workload done at the knee. Alright, so again, time to stand up for a moment, and we'll think about that. So, we're going to just run at your comfortable pace, run at your on the spot. Okay, now try and hit the ground really quickly. Okay, now hit the ground really slowly. Okay, so just think about, I saw Wally talk about his excursion, and so think about how high you're going up and down. Think about the forces that you were using in different parts of your muscle groups. It's fairly obvious. So when you go out there running, try and pick up your cadence at the same speed. It has to be the same speed. And then try and slow it down at the same speed. So often best done on a treadmill to keep the speed level. Okay? Feel the forces and feel the changes. Okay? Without doing it, it's hard to know. But generally, as you pick up your cadence, you're going to decrease the workload in a hell of a lot of muscles throughout the whole body. That's what it wants to do. Okay? So for many older athletes that have degenerative issues all over the body and they just can't stand those high impact forces or peaks, well, it might be a simple way to go. It's just to increase their cadence, hit the ground quicker. And it's often why you'll see those shuffling little runners out there, just shuffling along, because that's probably all they can tolerate in terms of their running. Okay, good. This is pretty much another graph showing the same sort of thing. I think we're all bored of graphs, so I'm going to leave it, but it did talk about these numbers. All right, now here's my issue. Because I have patients that come in. I have patients that come in and someone's told them to put their cadence at maybe, example 180. And I'll come in and I'll get them on the treadmill and I'll put on the treadmill and go, okay, just go for an easy jog. And I'm going, what are you doing? And they go, I've got to keep my cadence at 180. We go, we're going slow. You don't need to, okay. Put up the pace. And then they keep their cadence at 180 and they put up the pace. They keep their cadence. And then they get to pace, try and put up really quick. And they can't get any quicker. They're sort of falling off because they're trying to keep their leg turnover going really quickly and they don't have that stride length to compensate. So don't ever get someone fixing on their cadence at all. I don't think you need to get someone fixing on their cadence. It's what's the point in doing it? We know that cadence changes as you run, as you change pace. If you're going to get someone running outside, they're going to go up and down hills, they're going to hit wind resistance, their pace is going to change, which is going to invariably change their cadence. So if they're always trying to target that same cadence, you're going to make it bloody hard work on it. Okay? So this is my point with a few things. Where am I up to with it? If we're going to change running, I think you're better off focusing on changing the actions of running rather than your cadence and rather than your footwear. Okay, and this is my analogy for it. I put it past my wife, and she had no idea what I was talking about, so we'll go with you guys. But golf, okay, it's to do with golf. Now, if I'm a golfer and I'm a terrible golfer, which is why this works really well with me, and the reason it didn't work with my wife is because she has no idea about golf. When I play my little bits of golf at the driving range, when I get, say, my woods or my 3 irons or whatever, and I try and hit it, it tends to go, either I miss the ball or it goes right or left or it goes anywhere. It's unpredictable where it goes. So when I get my 7 iron or 9 iron, it tends to go beautiful. Every time it goes straight and it gets beautiful height and velocity. So then you can go, all right, this is the footwear. This is the footwear analogy. Always just use the 7 or 9 iron. That's what you're doing footwear. That's what changing your footwear does. Okay, if you said to a golfer, good, fix your swing, only use a 7 or 9 iron out there. Perfect. You're going to get around the course a lot quicker, a lot less shots because there's going to be less spraying around. Great. Okay, cool. But golf is going to tell you where to go if you told them that. Got a lot more clubs in the bag than Steve's. Cadence. Well, the other thing I noticed, if I had my 3 iron and I just did a little swing like this, I tended to hit it every time. I tend to go straight. Not very far, but tend to go forwards. So the cadence analogy is just tell your golfer, don't bother about swinging through it, just do a little chip. And it'll go straight. And you get to the end probably a little bit quicker because you're not spraying it around. But you get to the end a bit quicker than you otherwise would. So that's my analogy. If you told a golfer that, they'll tell you to piss off. And golfers go get technique lessons. They get training lessons on how to swing the ball properly through all their clubs. So the analogy there is, when we're trying to get someone to run, teach them how to run. Don't just try and change the environment. Don't try and change the stimulus that you give to them. Add things or take things away to them to try and get them to run better or quicker. Okay. We all have the capacity to run well and quickly. We just have to know how to do it. Okay, and we've sort of talked about that now in some sort of ways and how to do it, and we'll go through it a little bit more in a second. Does that make sense? So that's my big argument with it. Does that answer your questions right now?
Yeah.
All right. So injuries. So there's so many different articles in running about injuries and management. And you don't even have to take in any of this, but basically know that running causes a hell of a lot of injuries. and you can associate running with injuries and different types of running patterns of injuries. And they've associated large ground reaction forces with stress fractures and patellofemoral joint pain. They've found that athletes that rear foot strike get more repetitive stress injuries than forefoot strikers. They've found that compartment syndrome in the anterior compartment comes about through forefoot striking, and when you get them to, rear foot striking, when you get them to forefoot strike, it takes away their compartment syndrome. That's really obvious. These things are obvious. We know that. Like, all you've got to do is apply the biomechanics that we've talked about. Okay, so we know that here, that if we have a high ground, well, you can work that out. If you have a high ground reaction force, that it's probably going to cause a lot more force to your long bones. Seems obvious. And therefore, you can only guess at the way to manage, say, patellofemoral joint pain is, well, what do? That should be increased hip abductor streak. They increase their step rate, sorry, it should say there, to reduce patellofemoral joint pain. So that's obvious, we already know that. If you increase your step rate, you reduce the ground reaction forces. So you can already treat patellofemoral joint pain by everything we've talked about. They've also done it through a forward lean. I won't go into the mechanism behind that, but they've done it with that. We've already worked out that if you rear foot strike, well, you're going to land like that, and then when you land, your foot is going to have to plantar flex slowly. So it's just like in walking. If you walk a lot, you'll get this as well. But you've got to get that eccentric action through your tibia, so then therefore you've got to put extra pressure through it. So if we forefoot strike, well, we run on our toes a little bit more. Therefore, you're not using your tibia. Okay, pain gone, easy to work out. You guys knew that just from the mechanics. We found that runners changing to a forefoot strike or barefoot shoes, into their forefoot, have been linked to metatarsal joint injuries or Achilles injuries. Bloody obvious as well. Okay, we worked that out. So patients that have Achilles injuries, well, they're going to be more comfortable being a rear foot striker. Okay, so everything is really obvious if you just think of the mechanics. It's not difficult or not hard. So I think all of us now will have a great ability to treat the majority of injuries that you see in running. Okay, because all you've got to do is now think about the mechanics that we've talked about, think about the changes that occur when you do so. Alright, I was hoping to show you some videos that I've taken down here when I get people changing their running, but I couldn't get the iPad sending its videos to where I wanted to, so I'm going to talk you through it and hopefully that is good enough for what we need. Key points again. Running is a repetitive high load activity. I think look at the athlete's biomechanics, and then what you're seeing, is this damaging? If we change it, will we cause more damage? And that's the big question. If you don't just willy-nilly change things, because again it's a high load activity, we know that if we change someone from a rear foot pattern to a forefoot pattern, that they've increased their chances for a stress fracture in their metatarsals, increased the chance of any calf or Achilles injury. We know that if we bring someone back to a rear foot strike, that we tend to increase their ground reaction forces, so we can cause some damage there. So don't just throw big changes to an athlete. Very, very, very risky, and you could get them injured. If you do so, you need to bring back their volume or what they're doing and train them for it. And personally, if I ever change someone towards a mid-foot to forefoot strike, I don't do it until I've given them probably at least 6 weeks of calf strengthening and getting them to load up the calves, getting them to do some skipping and getting them to apply loads into their forefoot and getting used to it. I won't get them to do any running before they've done that. Okay, so that's really important. And the other point with that is, the other thing I do is anyone that has an injury that is a runner and then spends time off running, they always have to do calf raises or calf work as part of the time that they're off, so that way they don't decondition, and that way when they get back to running, there's less chance of injuries. Okay, so every one of my patients tends to do some sort of calf work. Alright. when I read a lot of the running articles, I get really annoyed because it is like those cadence articles and is like those footwear articles where they're just focusing on these little gimmicks and things to give people. And it just annoys the crap out of me because no one ever seems to look at running mechanics and measures the changes if I change someone's running mechanics. There's no article that says, that I can find, it might be out there and I haven't found it yet, but if I give someone, teach someone to run correctly, do I end up changing their ground reaction force? Do I end up changing, some of the forces around their ankles, hips and knees? There are not really too many articles about that. So it was interesting to read what Craige wrote. He's the one that wrote that cadence article before, and I think maybe he's changed his tune a little bit, but reading this, there is too much heterogeneity among runners to believe that one running pattern is universally ideal. So rather than showing people how to run, perhaps we should be showing them how not to run. Two such characteristics to avoid might be excessive vertical displacement of one's centre of mass or bounce, and landing with the foot well ahead of the centre of mass or overstriding. Neither characteristic likely adds a competitive or biomechanical edge for the endurance runner. Avoiding these basic faults reduces the mechanical demands associated with running, while still allowing the individual to self-select other features based on comfort or preference. I think that's fantastic. It just really simplifies it for us as well. We don't have to think too much about it. Often it is just looking for the really obvious thing that they're doing wrong. And to be honest, what I see in the clinic, probably 90% of the time, it is just overstriding. So the majority of the time, all you need to do is cue someone into where they're landing their foot. Whether you show it, I'll take a video and show them, and you show them, and sometimes straight away, bang, it's fixed. And they're just up there and they're landing a bit differently. But care with it, when they do land, sometimes they can go from a rear foot strike to a forefoot strike, and that's when I'll pull up the brake and say, okay, we'll just strengthen you up a little bit and then we'll get to that, because as soon as I give you that cue, you're going to get an injury if you keep doing that. So you've got to have to be careful. But it simplifies it. It's easy. Okay. So it's not too difficult. And the criticism I have about a lot of running, I've been and seen a few running labs, and they have all these cameras out there, and then they give the patient this piece of paper, and it's got all these numbers and angles and things, and it's bloody confusing. And I say, why are you doing this? And if they're honest to you, they'll say it's a gimmick. They just tell you, oh, it's a gimmick, just buy and the patient buy it. I'll probably just give you the same cue that any of us would give them, but they sort of do it as that whole gimmick side of things. I think it's just too confusing. This sort of says everyone's different. Everyone has their own individual way. If we're just focusing on angles and things and trying to make that one exact angle and perfect runner, well, it probably doesn't exist out there. It might exist for one runner, but not every runner. There's billions of us on the world, so I think that's the fault in that. Keep it simple. Keep it obvious. So this is what I'll talk about. Sorry again, I'm getting ahead of myself. When you look at someone running, there are people that can't run on treadmills. They just run on them and freak out, and they completely change their running technique. There's some studies out there that will say that running on a treadmill is very similar to running outside, and some that say it's very different. So I think it depends on the individual again. So for simplicity, it's always easier to get them on a treadmill if they can do. But if they look like they don't have a clue how to run, just take them outside or take them somewhere they can run, and just watch them run on normal ground, because you might find that they actually run a lot better on normal ground than they do on a treadmill. Okay, so just take that into account. As I said, look at different running speeds. You want to see changes in the way they run as they increase speed. And an example is I had a girl come in on Saturday who wanted to know how to sprint faster. So she's a 17-year-old girl, and came in and said, I just want to know how to sprint faster. And I looked at her run slowly, and then I looked at it and gone, oh, that's no good. There's things I want to change there. But I sort of said to her, but that's okay, you only want to know how to run faster. So we went outside and got her sprinting, and action sprinting was so different from jogging, and I only had to treat the sprinting side of things, because I know that she's not going to go. She said, I don't go out and jog and run around, I only want to know how to sprint. It was great. So look at them at different speeds, but sometimes you don't have to address the things that maybe look bad at a different speed. You only have to address their goals if you need to. Okay. As I said, don't get bogged down by measuring all the joint angles. Probably not needed. You just, if it's not obvious, well then it's probably not important. Use simple cues. Try and give one cue, maybe only 2 cues to use, to think about. Any more, you might just get them overthinking, and then they just spend all their time just thinking about what cue to use, and they can't remember how to run anymore, and you've made running way too difficult than whatever it is. So use simple and easy cues. The thing that I'll tend to do is, I'm just a big fan of always altering their body position, often first. So if I see someone overstriding, sometimes it can be because they're sitting quite low. So again, when you guys go out there and watch people run, you'll see it as well. People that run down here like this, like that, and you can just maybe be a bit higher, and automatically my stride changes. If I come a little bit higher, or am I leaning forwards, or am I leaning back? And so sometimes just finding that body position can help. And then we can use drills to reinforce cues. So, if you guys have any questions regarding these things as well, please go for it.
With something like that, obviously, it's sport dependent. You see obviously a lot of runners. The running style you just demonstrated is probably like more typical of someone who has to change direction a bit, or like a hockey player. I've got a couple of patients that spring to mind. How do you then sort of rectify that when they're running with a stick, in
leaning
that
forward,
sort of flexed position,
yeah,
and very sort of hip dominant, and then sort of overstrider, sort of compound things?
Yeah, I don't think you need to overstride when you're like that. So I think you can still correct their running position like that, and it's probably just about getting them to lift their legs up a little bit more rather than just being down here and getting their hips up. I don't think you have to overstride just because you are leaning forwards. I think you can get away with it. Granted, your centre of mass is forwards, so you're going to land a little bit more there, but I don't think you have to completely overstride.
And then how do you sort of, well, how long a time frame do you give a patient like that to correct?
Everyone's
Sort of
different.
neuromuscular
Everyone's different.
You know, you've had years of probably poor technique. How quickly can you give them?
Not an answer
Yeah.
I can give, but there's studies out there who change people's technique and game, and they'll say about 12 weeks, but some might be quicker, some might be slower.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. Alright, so when I'm looking at someone run, this is sort of the list in my head that I'll go through. First thing I'll do is I'll just get them up there running for a couple of minutes. And the reason I do that is I just want them to get used to the treadmill. This is on a treadmill. I'll get them used to the treadmill. So I just put them up there, get them on it, get them comfortable with it. Okay? And we do know that over that time frame, there's a study that shows this, that your gait might change on a treadmill as you just get used to it. And I'll just say to them, just put it to a comfortable speed, put it to your normal jog pace. That's all I want. And while they're doing that, I just listen to their cadence. So I think use your senses. I listen to their cadence and hear how hard they're hitting the ground. Does it sound like they're thumping like an elephant? Or are they nice and soft? How quick are they turning the legs over? How slow is it? If I change the speed, can I hear the change in their cadence or not? If I don't hear the change in their cadence or not? So I get them up there and leave them up for a bit and just listen to them for a little bit. And I just watch and I just look for the really obvious things. But I'll look at their body position. Are they leaning forwards too much? Are they too erect? Okay. Probably when you're running, you want to just be a nice, comfortable, tall, straight posture. A slight leaning forwards because we are propelling ourselves forwards, but fairly straight through the torso and hips. You don't want to be flexed forwards like that. Okay, for example. I look at their pelvic tilt. Are they running in a really anteriorly pelvic tilt? You should be slightly neutral to posteriorly tilted when you're running. Okay? So if you've got your ass sticking out like this, well then you're not going to be able to get your hips up nice and high, which is going to limit your stride length. Okay? Are you squatting down in that example before? Are they just down here? Are their hips down too much? When they land, I want to see sort of when you land that your thighs are sort of relatively close together, that they're not sort of spread apart like this. Okay? So they're relatively close together. I want to see that as the leg swings through, that the knee and the foot actually comes up and bends, that it's not a straight leg coming through. Okay, so your people that haven't worked out the big difference between walking and running, sort of swing their leg through like that, really straight. Whereas we want to see that foot come up and recover and come forwards. And often as they bring that, as you increase your pace, we've already talked about your knee's going to bend a little bit more. So as you increase pace, you want to see that. So if they're struggling to do it, put up the pace, see if that's already a cue for them to do it, and it might do it for them naturally. And then you can teach them that. Look at their foot contact. So are they landing in front of themselves? Are they landing underneath themselves? Do they land in a rear foot strike, a mid foot strike, or a forefoot strike? There's plenty of people that can land in a forefoot strike and overstride, and that's because they're landing plantar flexed. Okay? There's plenty of people that land underneath themselves and rear foot strike. So if you that's where that foot position doesn't always change. You know, just saying to someone, okay, now land underneath yourself. Well, it may or may not change how they strike their foot, so it may or may not change some of their loading rates. Look at whether the foot is neutral, so not plantar flex. We talked about that a little bit more. Look at their hips, and I'll probably put that up there, and look at their supination, pronation of their foot, which is often more for people like the pods out here. And another one is that, this should be on the other slide, but that their feet aren't crossing midline in that stance phase. So when you're landing, that they're not going across, because that's been associated with tibial stress fractures and ITB friction syndrome when you come across your midline. Okay? So an easy way to do that, and which what I need to do downstairs on our treadmill, is put a line all the way down the centre of the treadmill, so that way when you get them running on it, you can look at that. Alright. Swing. So when they're swinging, make sure they can maintain their pelvic tilt as they're pushing off, that they don't just go into this position, an anterior tilt, and make sure that their foot comes up. And with your arms, just nice relaxed arm swing. Nothing too forceful, not being too tense up in the shoulders, not rotating the thoracic spine, not crossing over the body, but just nice and comfortable, forwards and back will do, okay? So it's not too complex. So I think it's a great picture because there's a whole lot of crappy running techniques there, and I think most of us now can actually pick out which are good and which are bad ones. So who wants to call out, just everyone can have a go, and what's wrong with this fella here? Just simple, could be 1,001 things, but just name the obvious. Good, alright. What about this guy?
High arms.
Yeah, I think right, and I also think he's probably rotating his body a little bit. It's hard to tell because I know it's a 2D image and it's a silhouette, but I reckon he's rotating his body just a little bit. What about, is there anything wrong with this lady?
Second one in the middle.
Third one, so third one across. I'll tell you what I think. I think she looks like your classic older runner who doesn't have enough calf strength. Reason being is she can't plantar, she might later in this stance, but she's pretty extended through the hip and she's just not plantar flex, she's not pushing off. So that's typically what you'll see in a runner that doesn't have the strength. So that's what I think's wrong with her, is that she's just not strong enough. This one, keep going through, overstrider. This one here, I don't think it's too bad, but I think he's leaning forwards a little bit too much through his body and torso. And you can compare that, I reckon this one's almost your gold standard there. So this guy's up nice and tall and straight, this guy's looking down at the ground. So the simple cue for this guy might be, well, just lift up your head, look up, and he might naturally bring up his hips. And same thing with this guy, is looking down the ground, bent over, so we need to get his hips up and underneath him, and that might be the simple cue there. So relatively easy, it's all obvious, you can all see it really, and look for the obvious and change the obvious. So any questions regarding any of that?
I'm gathering based on what you're saying earlier about shoes and so on, that podiatry is sort of low on your list of things for runners?
No, but I still love I use Lewis and Tim all the time here. It's very, very, very important because I think what's really important though is to have obviously strong foot, but podiatry is important in sometimes controlling those medial to lateral forces that we'll see, which can then sometimes alter how their knees and hips are moving. So if you can't control those forces, well, sometimes the pods can come in and give you a correction, an orthotic correction, or put you in a more controlled shoe to control those medial to lateral forces. I think that's when they come in quite well. But I use my pods here to help me with a lot of education to the athlete about foot control and foot strengthening. Because actually I think it's a big negative on a lot of podiatrists, but the guys here that I work with are awesome. That I think orthotics are often overprescribed. It's another topic, and I think foot strengthening is often the way to go for a lot of people. But yes, you can. I think
that's sort of what I'm getting at when I say podiatry. I guess I'm talking about orthotics. So.
Yeah, no, very important still in some of those patients, because some of them they're just genetically unlucky, and they're just born with some funky little changes to their bodies, and sometimes they just need to be corrected to some degree. And there's not a lot you can do about it besides that. So still use them heaps. Alright, so I hope from this we've got a little bit of an arsenal of cues that you can use to run. Does everyone think they could probably get out there and teach someone in some degrees, or pick up some issues with runners and give them cues? You guys can throw up any cue you want. There's no right or wrong cue. It's whatever works for the athlete. So just, as I said, pick the obvious, give them the cue for the obvious, and see if it makes a difference. And if it makes a difference, great. But be very cautious of the change it makes. Are you going to overload them if you send them out there? Do you need to then get them in the gym and stronger to do that? Okay, that's something you've got to be careful with. Now, I want to go through some running drills, and luckily we got Wal and maybe Alicia here to go through some running drills. The reason I'll go through some of them. The reason I want to go through this is it's a few simple little things that I'll often give to a lot of runners, irrespective of what's wrong with them, because I'm just trying to teach normal running positioning. So I'll go through first, Wal, and then I'll jump in if I need you. I will at the end one. So in terms of foot contact, well, a simple foot contact drill is just lifting up the foot and landing it underneath yourself, like this. And all you're doing is practicing where the foot lands. So I'm landing it underneath my centre of mass. Okay? So it's just teaching someone that's where it should land. And you can sort of see as I'm bringing up my leg, I'm sort of bringing my foot to bottom, knee up forwards action anyway, which is that normal running action. My foot lands fairly flat, or it's dorsiflex. Or it's not dorsiflex, it's a neutral flexion position, which is great, so I'm not landing too plantar flexed, which we don't want to land on our like plantar flexed. It's okay to land forefoot, you just don't want to land plantar flexed. And I'm not landing on my heel like this. So it's just teaching that normal neutral position. Okay? So that's just a foot contact drill that you can practice. Then you can do a bit of a walking high knees, and this is just teaching people to stay tall in their hips. So I'm up tall, I'm walking forwards, lifting up the knee, the foot towards the bottom and coming down. And that's all I do. And I do it really slowly, I barely move forwards. The reason I barely move forwards is because when I'm running, I want that emphasis on them sort of going in that direction, going more vertical rather than forwards and pushing forwards. Because once you've accelerated, you've already built up momentum. So inertia is always going to take you forwards. Air resistance will slow you down, bit of ground contact will slow you down, but your momentum will still take you forwards. So often all you've got to do is elevate yourself upwards over the ground. Okay? So I want that emphasis just to be up. So it's just up like this. So they can walk through, be up tall, and land pretty much underneath themselves. Okay? And if someone can't do this, well then they're going to have a lot of trouble running well. Because this is the most stable, basic form that they can do it in. Okay? So this is an easy drill. Just cycling the foot to the bottom, knee up, foot to the bottom, knee up, landing underneath myself, staying tall. Then you can make it harder by getting them onto their toes and emphasising the rise onto the toes. So rising up, okay? And again, I am keeping my toes up, so I'm not twinkly toes in the air. So you want to keep your toes up in the air, and I'm landing with a neutral foot, not a plantar flex foot. And I'm landing pretty much underneath myself. I'm barely going forwards. So it's not a race. So it's up like that. That's all it is. So it's barely an extension of the other drill. Do you reckon you can do it quicker, Bob? Running?
Doing beautifully.
I don't know if my calf's going to do it. So the extension of it, I don't want to hurt my calf, is doing that faster and running. Okay, so you're just running on the ground. But the key to it, as we sort of know, is you don't go forwards quickly. It's not a race forwards. So when I do it with my patients in here, I say to them, I'm taller, I got longer legs than you, more than likely than most people. Okay, you can't beat me to the end of the wall. Most of them will just fly up and beat me. I said, no, you've got to run with me, so we'll just do it together, really slowly. And we'll just slowly progress forwards. And that's what I think people forget about these drills. It's just not a race, it's just learning those mechanics. Because when you've got momentum behind you, when you're running 8 metres a second or whatever, that's all you need to do is run like that, and momentum pretty much going to be taking you forwards, and that little bit of forwards propulsion as well. A-skip. A-skip's this. I won't do it on my left, but it's that sort of not. Do you want to do A-skip? A-skip's sort of like that high knees running, but you just got to skip in it. Go for it. Is that right? Yeah, pretty good. I'd still go forward slower. Slower? Slower. Less forward momentum, but that's okay. Yeah, because I just want the emphasis still on staying vertical and tall. Otherwise, you do see people when they focus on coming forwards, they just land there and they're overstriding. So you're just teaching them these bad patterns. So the emphasis is landing underneath yourself. And then I take it to slow running, so just up and down on the spot. And then you just slowly get faster and faster and faster, and you're just increasing that leg turnover and going forward. So it's just getting them running slowly well, and then increasing their pace quicker and quicker and quicker while maintaining that good form. So there's some of the drills I go through, and a good thing to practice with all runners as well. So that's kind of the end of my talk. Bang on 9, so that's perfect. What I want you guys to do, if you're not a runner, go out there and run now. Just spend a few months getting used to running, because without actually getting out there running and practicing the things, you can't teach it. Okay? When you go out and run, be really picky and just look at people running and try and pick their faults. And it's a great way to pass the time when you run, is just to sort of notice who's a good runner and who's not a good runner, and see if you can work out what makes them the better runner and what makes so and so the worst runner. So it's really interesting to look at, okay? And I reckon the majority of you now will be 10 times better runner. I reckon everyone walking out the door here should actually be a better runner for it. And it'd be interesting, we should do that one day, is take all your times and send you out the door and see if you run quicker, because I reckon you'll be quicker. Yeah. Good luck to you all. Any questions?
So footwear, Kev, you say, I'm sort of know the answer already. Is it more of a frontal plane thing when you're going to change footwear? Is it more when they've got that internal tibial rotation? Is that when you're looking at changing footwear more than strike patterns or more than anything else? Is it more to control,
control more of that one first, rather than the other one. The other thing I'll say is that variability is a great thing. In anyone, having some variety to your tissues is great, and that is what makes us more resilient. And we know that in all parts of our body, that variability. So if you have a high level runner and they do different, and they go out for runs and they only do long runs, get them going out there and doing some interval work and fartlek work just to challenge their body in another way. Okay, so they start, as they pick up their pace, we know they're going to land on their forefoot a bit more, just to make them more resilient and stronger as a runner. So that's one thing I will say actually that I didn't bring up is get your patients out there, if they're runners, changing paces, doing different things with their running. If they're a bit more interested in a runner, get them changing footwear, get them into a bit more of a minimalist type, like a racing flat. Doesn't have to be a Vibram or a Nike Free or anything, maybe a more minimalist shoe, just for short periods when they're doing some of their more high intensity training and running. Get them to be used to those loading patterns, and it's going to make the body tissues more resilient to it. So I think that variety and variability is a good thing, but don't change things just for the sake of it either.
Any more questions? I've got a couple, so just 5 more minutes or so. How many pods have we got here? So I've got a few. Can you just quickly comment on, because we don't obviously get this opportunity very often to have a lot of pods here. One of the questions I had, and it's not running biomechanics, sorry Kev, but it is running injuries, is probably callus formation and what you reckon we should do for that, because obviously there's a couple of common sites for callus build up in runners that we see a lot in here, and blister care. I know that's a question without notice, but I reckon we see a lot of it, and I reckon the pods can play a big role in it. So callus stuff first, one of you, three of you here. Common sites, and then what you reckon we should do for care.
Common sites are generally around the first MTPJ and RPJ, which then obviously means they're pronating through that area with much force. So obviously, changing their footwear is one way about doing that. Addressing the biomechanics.
And deriding them or not?
Yeah, certainly deriding. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which then can also then lead to blistering as well if there's too much there. What do you want to do? Blistering or? Or Mel?
Preventive taping for blistering. Some people are just really prone to blistering, no matter what shoes or whatever. There's a special technique we can teach them. Otherwise, socks are a big one.
Yep.
Wicking moisture away socks, which you don't want to know about.
Blisters are usually caused one of 3 ways, like
Yeah,
friction, moisture and heat.
Yeah.
The main 3 causes of it, and it's just trying to figure out which is the cause and trying to get rid of that cause. Most of the time you can with these changing padding or applying a tape, socks to whip away moisture, and then there's everything from cooling shoes to cooling inserts going right through. The blisters are pretty much finding out the cause and treating that.
As I said, I don't think we get this opportunity very often, and I think those points are really valid because I think both of them, it's probably fair to say, are shear injuries as opposed to impact injuries. And I think the problem is with some of them that they then alter loading patterns, and then we see more significant injuries down the line. So I don't think it's good enough for us as physios to identify a fairly big callus build-up, medial first raise sort of area or an IP joint, and not deal with it. So that's my first thing. Anyone else got any other questions?
You mentioned before that one particular silhouette was perhaps the gold standard. You're then also talking about how there's variability that needs to be thrown in the mix.
Yeah, I think there's a close to gold standard. So there's an ideal efficient biomechanics, but you're going to have angle differences between them. But as I said, I think you just aim at changing the obvious. Get the obvious right, or if they've got a particular injury pattern that's recurrent, well then you might make sure that you get them away from the things that tend to lead to that injury in running. But yeah, I think the key is it doesn't have to be completely static. You don't have to measure every angle. It's just got to look half decent, I think. That's really it.
Do you have a rule on how many things you change at once?
Never more than 2. Yeah. So hopefully I can give them the one cue that changes everything. So I don't like to give more than 2 cues at once because it's just too much to think about. And I've sometimes given more than 2, and it was to the detriment of the patient. They just got muddled up in their head and got confused and almost forgot completely how to run.
Do you ever find that people have, with that, if you change too much, they have like an intelligent gait anyway, and they're running that way for certain reasons, protecting certain things?
You kind of pick that up, but often they'll come into you already with that injury. Like you might see someone with a proximal hamstring tendinopathy or an Achilles injury, and they're limping because of that, and you can't physically change their action well. Should they be running?
So do you do a physical type
I
screen?
always do a physical screen, but yep, that's the first method.
And
get them to do basic things. So I'll get them to just look at their posture, look at them standing, look at them single leg stand on either side, look at them on their toes, look at their balance, their body control. I'll get them doing a single leg squat, I'll watch them jumping, I'll watch them hopping. So just real basic things just to get a little bit of an idea. And I've already spoken to them about their injury history. The first thing I do is find out how long they've been running for, any injuries they've had, what are their goals, what do they want out of what I'm doing. So I get a bit of a background so I know where they've been and what they want, where they want to go to. Yeah, always first. Okay, and from that little bit of easy movement screen, I've usually anyway half the time picked up their phone. You can already watch them do those things that you already 99% of the time you already know what you're going to do wrong half the time. It's quite interesting.
Just a random question. With all your track athletes, you get someone with your carpet and they're returning and you've got a sprinter. Whenabouts do you transition them back into a firm spike plate?
Very, very, what's the last thing you'll do? So you'll transition onto grass, and then you'll transition onto fast running on grass, and then you'll transition onto the track, and then you'll transition onto the spikes on the track. So it's the very, 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 very last thing you do. They're going to be on their toes, and especially on a track, they're going to be on a hard surface. So yeah, definitely the last thing you do. So it's like you would if you were training an athlete. You wouldn't send them out the first day. You make sure they've done everything else pain-free and got through those training before you. So there's no time frame. It's treated by the symptoms and what they present.
Do your track athletes ever run clockwise?
Some of them do. Not all. Some do. Is there anything into it? I don't know. I think there was one article in England 2 years ago that came up with that plantar strain on one side only, and they thought it was due to them running around. Sorry, not plantars, the plantars, compressive type injury to the Achilles came about through running the same way around the athletics track. Maybe.
Kev, you mentioned how important the calf is, and I agree with that. And you said it contributed to both vertical propulsion and to horizontal propulsion. What do you give for calf exercises? Like, do you just stand there and give calf raises, or do you think more about the horizontal component?
I think I do both now. I probably do more and more recently do both. Maybe a year or two ago I did less, but more and more recently I think about it. I'll probably credit you with this one, maybe.
That's where I was going with
it. Yeah, okay. Big on yourself, alright. Putting a TheraBand or band around their body and really working at propelling themselves forwards and stepping into it, so you can step yourself forwards with some sort of resistance. With that as well, I know that while we'll talk about he plays football, so there's a lot of change of direction, so it's not only important going forwards for them, it's important to go sideways, so they'll apply pressure with the TheraBand to go sideways and that way, and I think you can even go sort of push that way off your toes and even push that way off your toes with some resistance. So do you call it 3D calf exercises? I've heard it referred to something like that before, something similar like that.
Just rotational, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it is important. I think what you put up there is absolutely gold, but we need to make sure that we train, because you made the point that you probably do 6 weeks of training before you get back in the calf, particularly if you're altering mechanics and going to your toes. But I think that's important if you're recognising that there's both vertical and horizontal ground reaction force. One last serious question is the hip flexor. You mentioned it, but I'm not sure you really mentioned how much it contributes to that actual float phase that I've heard you mention before.
Yeah.
So can you just go over that again?
Well, sometimes when people are just running and they're really struggling, one of the cues I'll give to someone is just lift up your knees, and that is, say I've already said get your body up tall and it's still not working. You might say just lift your knees up, because just bringing your knees up can often be the impetus to increasing your stride length and pushing off your toes a little bit more and keeping your body up, so it can work in that impetus. So it's just a little bit of a cue. As you come up there, well, it automatically feels like it wants to drive you vertically and up and can increase your stride length. So it's just a little cue, and one that I very, very, very often give as well. It's be up there, one of the last ones I give.
That's pretty good. Your greatest athletic performance? What is it?
BMI? Yeah, I don't know.
The VMI? Do you want to explain that?
Do I? Alright. Does anyone know what a BMI is? I don't even know why I have it called. brought up, thanks Lewis. It's where you drink a beer and run a lap. And you do it 4 times, and it's a race, so you start to finish. And something that me and a few guys do at the end of the season. It's a bit of a laugh, and I guys welcome you guys to do it. Try and hold it down and see how fast you can go. But it so happens that next week these guys in America are putting on a world championships in beer miling, and they're getting Canada and Australia and the US to compete. So I've been lucky enough to someone's paid for my flights to go over there and compete in the world championships. Get to drink 4 beers and run a bit of a mile, and I'm hoping that my car folds up personally. Sorry, but it should be a bit of fun. So
potential world champion.
So yeah, I think there's a sport for everyone out there, and then, like, you guys can one day represent Australia too.
Kev, thanks very much. I think whenever we get speakers here, I would like to think that it is a stimulus for you to go on and learn more or read more, so I'm sure Kev's happy to share those articles with you, but certainly has raised some really good points, some that you've obviously nailed and highlighted, and some that will be a bit of a blur to some of us, so go away, research it a bit more, but Kev, thanks very much.
Yeah, I've got all the articles as well.